Hey everyone, you're watching DeFi Talks with DeFi Dad. Hey, thanks for joining me. It's Tuesday, June 28th, 2022. I'm joined here today by Pet3r Pan, who is I'll say you're a legendary investor in the crypto space. Peter is known for a number of teams he's worked with, but I'll say he was the founder of MetaCartel in the depths of the last bear market, and MetaCartel itself ended up investing in a number of household names within, I would say, the DeFi Web3 space. And then he's gone on now to become a part of the 1KX team, where he's investing in, leading Web3 teams there. So anyways, Peter, thanks for joining me, man. Good to see you. How are you doing?
It's good to be here. I think we did a podcast a while ago as well, a long time ago. And yeah, it's always great to chat.
Yeah. I was trying to remember that too. Like, when is the last time we spoke on a podcast? But I know I remember talking to you years ago just with MetaCartel, and at the time, I thought you all were crazy, obviously putting together what you did with MetaCartel, because you were really one of the first major DAOs, especially from a reputation standpoint, that was able to start to coordinate, whatever amount of ETH you had at that point, and start to invest in some of what would become leading teams, actually, like my friends and former colleagues at Zapper. Also, not to mention too, MetaCartel attracted quite a few, what I would say are like well-established, reputable names in our space. But of course, now you're working with, again, one of the most reputable funds, one of the longest term, working funds here in the Web3 space, 1KX. Maybe we should start there. I've laid out my admiration for MetaCartel and 1KX, but tell us a little bit more about, what was your background before crypto? And then let's talk a little bit about what you're doing now at 1KX.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the kind words. First of all, I guess, I was a UX designer outside of, Web3. I joined crypto, really dove into it mid 17, so I've been around for around 5 years now. Before then, the last product I worked on was this product called Cancer Aid, where it was a product that helps sort of cancer patients, get, basically funnel real-time feedback on the medication, the symptoms to clinicians and caregivers. And this was sort of a early stage startup based in Sydney. I was sort of the person who was the first designer brought on to just do a lot of contextual user research, right? So my job there, and for the other roles before, was really just product design, UX design, UX research, so my role there, it was a short stint, but to give people a better sense of what my world looked like before, was sort of, I was talking to I talked to around 50 to 60, cancer patients, and sort of got to understand the whole journey from end to end, right? I even sort of walked through the hospitals. I sat where, they were waiting, and the oncologists, even reading through the pamphlet, just getting a sense of everything about, really getting diagnosed, right? And yeah, and sort of I think after a while, I think, I, wanted to sort of explore something new, right? I had been doing product design for a while then, and yeah, it was getting, and I think I discovered, crypto and during that role. And I guess my first year and a half in crypto was really sort of working on UX infrastructure. I think back then the narrative was really the fact that UX, better UX would solve all our problems and bring us to mass adoption. And I think after working on that for a while, it was sort of clear that UX infrastructure was not the key solution. I think after we built a lot of the meta transactions technologies, for those who don't know, meta transactions are when sort of you have a transaction that's sponsored by third party, right? So you don't need gas to execute it. I think it was quickly realizing that who are we building this infrastructure for? And that's, I think, like when we realized that it was not UX that was the bottleneck to mass adoption, it was use cases. And that UX working group was known as MetaCartel, and hence the name MetaCartel, like meta transactions, meta. We didn't want to call it just another working group. So yeah, that's what we named it. And in 2018, it was sort of really like formed then. We built that. I think the unique thing about the group back then, even though it was just a UX working group, was the fact that it was really the first group in Ethereum that was really focused on the end user. It was really focused on bringing value to users. And I think then we sort of took that group and pivoted into a group focused on use cases, and we built. We tried to get a accelerator and DApp incubator off the ground, but we sort of like quickly realized we had no track record. There was no funding for applications, and I think we floundered around until I wanted to join Moloch DAO. There's sort of a whole saga there, but short story, it was a charity DAO in which I was too poor and too less and not well known enough to join. And then that's when we forked Moloch DAO to form this $100,000 grants DAO, where we gave out $1,000 to $5,000 grants to applications and use cases and DAOs. And it was not only a grant program, we wanted the grant program to really be used to bootstrap a community of builders, right? And yeah, we sort of ended up, incubating and sort of supporting things like Zapper, the DAOs. The weekend it was built, it was called DeFi Zap, back then. And supported things like Collabland that, we sort of like helped fund the initial prototypes. It was supposed to be a DAO ops tool. It was about, a Telegram bot for signaling DAO votes. We experimented with things like, can we build a service DAO, for a dev shop as a DAO? We built things such as like, we help sort of like work and fund things like, the initial iterations of catalog, the music NFT, archive today. And, I would say fund things like Snapshot as well early on. And yeah, like also launch a first investment DAO as well. And sort of my role there was a lot of the community coordination. And I guess, that sort of brings me to sort of 1KX. After doing this for a while, I really enjoyed the process of bringing things from 0 to 1. And so joined up with Christopher Heyman and Lasse Clausen, 1KX 2 years ago, pretty much. At the end of this month, it should be 2 years, so in a couple of days. And I would say sort of 1KX was one of the earliest funds, in crypto, which purely focused on building token networks, right? So after the token crash and the market crash, right, in 17 and 18, everyone really hopped on this sort of train hopped on the security token train, and hopped on the sort of the equity only sort of investment train. And I think 1KX is really the only fund back then that sort of had a core thesis around token networks, and the idea that value accrual and network effects can be far more superior when there's sort of a distributed ownership model that can sort of better attribute, rewards and value to those that bring value back into the marketplace or network. And yeah, I would say 1KX is sort of invest across the space, from the creator economy to play to earn, to cross-chain infrastructure, to ZK technologies, to really everything we can see sort of distributed token networks emerging from. And I would say our superpowers are in 3 areas. First one is really designing token models for our portfolio projects. We sort of have gone through every one of them. We've studied a ton of token modeling space. We ship sort of like suggestions and sort of like research for our portfolio projects, and oftentimes either resulting in design decisions around mechanisms design, distribution strategies, to often saying you're not ready for a token yet, you have no product market fit. The second area is really we build entire DAOs for our projects. So, most token networks really can be sort of thought of as marketplaces where you have supply and demand side goals. Every network has these two goals at heart, right? It's a bootstrap and sustain long-term network participation from both sides. And how we see go to market is less of this sort of B2B style, partnership style go to market strategy, but rather we look to build entire DAOs that can sort of aggregate and drive forward the goals of a network, right? So they can be fairly integrated, such as like Goblin Sachs. So we made investments in a project called Niftyfi. Supply side is borrowers with NFTs as collateral. Demand side is like NFT lenders. NFT loan underwriters, we were the first ones to actually build a bot that purely focused on underwriting liquidity and underwriting loans. And we realized this was quite profitable, making 40 to 60% APR. We turned that into a DAO, helped it raise funding, and this was sort of all built without any involvement from the core NiftyFi team. And now that it exists, there's competitors going after it. So there's a whole ecosystem of loan underwriters for NiftyFi now, and we sort of like take this. And I guess it's this idea that Goldman Sachs here, the DAO, the loan underwriting DAO, is purely driving forward demand side goals for the network. And I think the third one is really sort of just like we have our engineering team. We have engineers and we have data scientists that we can really sort of build anything. And right now we built front ends, back end infrastructure. We build we run sort of arbitrage bots between options and derivative exchanges. We run a connects router. So at the past we've done like 30% of the sort of volume in the network before, and at some point, and yeah, we run a bunch of other infrastructure behind the scenes as well. We build DAOs. We build DAOs to sort of drive forward portfolio support and drive forward portfolio goals. And I would say this is sort of why we wake up sort of every day. We're pretty excited about like building, not only investing.
How big is the team now?
We are 17 now, full time.
Wow, didn't realize that. So if anyone were to visit, you have a very simple website. If they go to 1kx.io, but at the very top it says decentralized token economies will transform the world. So I've always thought of all of you at 1kx as token maximalists. If you're looking to build something without a token, I would say that alone as a litmus test probably isn't a great fit for the theses that you all operate under. Just really quickly here before we talk a little bit more about your post on the landscape of these different investment incubation service DAOs, can you tell us just a little bit more about, I guess, what drives that thinking around token maximalism? Because there is, and the part of what I'm alluding to is we've lived actually through many years of tokens are bad. Like back in 2018, 2019, a lot of the ideas that you've mentioned here related to DAOs, related to tokenized networks, it was actually very unpopular at the time. There was a consensus growing as the markets were selling off in 2018 that the only token that made any sense at that point was Bitcoin. And then for those of us in Ethereum, it felt like we had been sold on all these new product ideas with a token, but there wasn't a product yet. So we were all basically just looking at Ether as a token that works. And so that thesis that the team was operating under before you even joined, that was a really radical way of thinking back then. I mean, I'm sure Lasse and Chris took a lot of heat from different peers buying so hard into the idea that tokenized systems would be superior. So on that note, yeah, can you tell us a little bit more about how you all think about that from a token maximalist standpoint?
Yeah, back in 2018, everyone bloody hated tokens. It was seen as like if you had a token back then, you want to issue one, you're a scam. I think very similar to how NFTs are right now, right? If someone wants to drop, it would be seen as a scam. And I think it's less of the fault of the concept or medium or technology, but rather sort of how it's been executed, right? And more as a fault, right? And so I would say that, for 1kx, we invest into all sorts of things, and I think it's less about investing in a token immediately or having a project launch a token immediately, but we're always aligned, with a project in terms of launching a token network over the long term, right? So it's a lot more nuanced in terms of the order of operations involved, in terms of when a token emerges and how a token emerges. But yeah, I would say sort of, that thesis sort of really emerged from the fact that from this cost of trust thesis, right? It's this idea that 80% of the U.S. economy, or at least of finance in general, and with transaction costs are related to auditing and reporting, and the fact that you can't actually trust a single centralized entity or middleman. It's this idea that, by establishing open source, organizations that can sort of like, act as transparent, networks that facilitate, economic activity, you can sort of like, de-risk platform risk, and you can create something that can be trusted as a neutral, base building block, right? That others can build on top of, right? So I think like that's part of our thesis, that we're looking for token networks in the sense that like we're looking for marketplaces that, can, that look to facilitate economic activity. And we're looking for these marketplaces, which can eventually become a platform, right? So like, a way to scale that value crawl of the marketplace. Yeah, and I think like, we've sort of been trying to apply it in every area we can see fit, from virtual game economies to, I guess, cross-chain liquidity protocols, right? Yeah, so I think we have a high-level understanding of what of how decentralized technologies and decentralized coordination and how token incentives can be used to establish, greater amounts of wealth, greater value crawl, greater market share dominance. And it's just like thinking through how to apply this, mental model across different niches and different domains in their own specific ways.
Yeah, I want to say that probably a few years ago, I would have struggled to fully explain why it is that this token maximalist viewpoint has played out well in our space. And I could give a few examples where there has been and there continues to be talking points, especially those in Web 2, that none of this makes any sense when the UX can be quote unquote easier or simpler by just having some sort of trusted centralized entity. And I will say over the last several weeks, we've seen this like credit crisis within centralized crypto finance. So, whether this is relating to someone like a Celsius, which as of this today, June 28th, 2022, we don't know if they're solvent or not. There's rumors about whether they are or they're not. But it all comes down to the black box that is Celsius, or a centralized crypto bank or lender. Now, I'm not pretending that standing up something like a Compound or Aave probably wasn't harder. Like it
Right.
clearly was. It comes with a tremendous amount of risk. But at the end of the day, I think that the fine tuning of those incentives, if you can get them to work, in the end ends up being, able to stand the test of time. And so we've actually seen these, tokenized protocols for DeFi, these very like base layer type money Legos like Aave, Compound, Uniswap, Maker, with especially with DAI being a truly stable coin. We're seeing these money Legos hold up beautifully in a very brutal, scary market where there's been a contagion that's sort of spread from a number of epic collapses, um, including Terra. Long story short, what I'm trying to get to is I think this has actually stood as proof of this long-held thesis of 1KX that, the way forward is through tokenized incentives. We never said it was easy. It's going to be very hard, and there's going to be bumps in the road, and there's going to be, again, lots of risk to early adopters. But in the end, I think that instant auditability of these protocols is, creating a more robust digital finance system.
And an important point to note is that all of Aave and Compound is running at zero fixed cost.
Yep. Absolutely. So sort of pivot back to, sorry, it's my dog there. Sorry to pivot back to what I really wanted to talk to you about today is, you had put out a post, and I actually should screen share this a bit just as we get started. You had put out a post called Unbundling Venture Capital via DAOs. And it gives a really nice breakdown almost like a categorizing of service DAOs, incubation DAOs, and investment DAOs. And I want you to be able to kind of walk us through what are the differences, and then really like where that's left you thinking about the future of the DAO landscape. So, Peter, would you like me to share my screen at all to kind of
Go
show
for
this
it.
as you walk through it?
Yeah,
Cool.
you wish.
Maybe you can kick off then with, I guess, what's the TLDR on this unbundling of venture capital via DAOs?
Yeah, I think traditionally, people have, I guess, what is venture capital, right? It's this idea that you have, organization that takes, capital from limited partners, right, or investors, and invests it into high growth opportunities, right, investment opportunities. And traditionally in venture, it's mostly, framed as, I guess the customers have been mostly framed as the LPs, the investors of the fund, right? And I guess and oftentimes the founders have been overlooked in many cases, right? And when framing like the business of venture capital, and I guess in this post we sort of frame, venture capital as a services business, right? Where the customers are actually the founders, and I guess as you've seen it in the bull market, right? When there's a ton of capital, what happens, right? What actually matters to founders? It's not just capital, but actually, I think in reality, it's the services that help, founders go to market and get off the ground and build faster, easier, better, right? It's the key jobs to be done effectively, So it's framing venture capital as a services business for founders, and yeah, and I guess it's a post that breaks down this idea that over the long term, right? Venture capital itself is eventually, I think, going to be, I wouldn't say displaced, but dismantled and unbundled by hyper specific organizations that are able to provide a value, micro value props, in their own ways and their own specialities, right?
Yeah, so why don't we talk about then those different DAOs here that you called out, and just adding a bit to what you mentioned there. When I worked at Zapper, so I worked at Consensus with a number of different startups there, but then I would say Zapper really was getting my feet wet in a true like Web3 startup. We actually raised money twice while I was there. And I remember as someone on the core team, my thinking was, let's not bring anyone on board unless they're able to offer something beyond just money. Now, sometimes, of course, founders look to that. It is good to, I think, to have a few on board who just write a check and stay out of your way. But all things held equally, if someone can stay out of your way, and respect your leadership as a let's say a founder, but then be able to bring some expertise that's lacking. I would say a lot of Web3 startups are missing legal expertise. Like that's something that, like unless they've brought on some legal representation, having raised enough money, it's one of the things. Design, I mean, gosh, at Zapper, I felt so lucky just because Seb was this like master designer as a co-founder, but most startups I think suffer from not having that. And then anyways, there's a number of other like areas here that we can go into. So that being said, if the landscape of those that can potentially invest in you, if it leaves you in a place wanting more, that's why people talk about value add funds or value add angels. That puts us, sets us up here to talk more about these specific types of DAOs that could essentially come in and provide a service in exchange for some equity, or in some cases also invest and then add that value. But yeah, can you walk us through what do you mean by service DAO versus incubation versus investment DAO? And then I'll try to show some of the screenshots here of the different DAOs you highlighted.
Yeah, right. So like as a founder, right, and when you're raising capital, it's really about like, when you talk to investors, right, you're really vetting them for like the unique value add. Whether services, domain expertise, or or network, right? And I think sort of these sort of three types of DAOs encompasses the various types of value add that traditionally founders look for from investors. So service DAOs are organizations that basically provide services in return for ownership or payments. Incubation DAOs are organizations that help you build products, right, in exchange for ownership, typically. Investment DAOs are organizations that provide capital together and invest together in exchange for ownership, right? So I think these are the sort of three elements of value add, if you will, right? From investors that you typically sort of seek. And this is sort of just a landscape overview of these different ones, right? And I think, I guess our long-term thesis is that while these three categories may look very distinctly separate as of now, a lot of these DAOs will cross-pollinate, and they will all eventually set up their own investment services arms or might invest themselves, right? Investment DAOs may set up services arms to differentiate themselves. Incubation DAOs have done so in the past, where they've incubated projects and then launch investment arms to value capture the downstream deal flow as well, right? So it's just like sort of extrapolating the current progression of how these organizations are operating.
Do you, Peter, do you think any one of these three is having the most impact among all these DAOs? In the current sort of hybrid landscape where we have a lot of participation from I don't want to call it a traditional fund, but like 1KX, for example, or my team at 4RC. I mean, whether you're set up as a venture fund or hedge fund, I think we're all trying to provide services that fall into these different categories. But right now, it feels like we've just begun to leap into an era where you're raising a round and you look at the cap table and you see more DAOs than you've ever seen before. It used to be pretty radical to see a DAO in there. MetaCartel is one of the few that you would expect to see. The Lao, actually, I should go back to that. Some of those investment DAOs really made like a splash in the early days. But yeah, any other DAOs here, I guess, you'd like to call out that you think are making a greater impact?
Yeah, it's fascinating, right? I think that it really depends on the market condition, right? So in the bear market, right, capital scarce, capital is massive. Quick, helpful capital, even non, capital that leaves you alone to do your thing, is massively, important. And I think in a bull market, when capital is abundant, right, actual services and value add is scarce, right? So I do see like these categories of DAOs having sort of their own highlights, throughout the market cycles, right? And market cycles will always exist. And as these DAOs sort of like branch out and diversify sort of the services or they provide effectively, from being just services themselves, incubation to investments, they'll be able to sort of transcend sort of the market conditions. But I think for now, they all have the different roles across markets. And, I do think that I think like so far we've made the most progress in figuring out how to run investment DAOs, at least with providing capital. I think what they've struggled with in general is organizing the members to go further than that and provide value add. I think most of them have been pretty valuable in providing relationship-based access into various networks, but not much further than that. And I think that's simply due to the fact that well-run DAOs have a single focus, and it's the moment you add a secondary focus, things get messy. So if I do see investment DAOs building out their own service arms as a value add, I expect it to see it happen in a sub team or a scaled fashion, right? I think that so I think we've figured out how to run and really like manage investment DAOs fairly well. I think we've yet to really understand how to build products together in communities with incubation DAOs. We have had a few incubation DAOs sort of emerge, but honestly, from what I've seen, they're still like fairly light in sort of the touch, and it's mostly been the value add has mostly been around signaling and branding, which is just as valuable. right? And I think with Service DAOs, it's been the area of DAOs in which there's been the least exploration and the most to figure out. How can you organize people together to build products, together to provide engineering services, design services, legal services? How do you take 20 people and coordinate work and deal, scale from 5 clients to 20 clients, right? How do you go beyond that, right? And I think that I do think that like sort of services work is the base building block of everything in, tech, right? If we can figure out services, then you can sort of start composing services with, other services, and then you add, capital on top. Now you have sort of a venture ecosystem. And I think it's still extremely early days. I think there's major issues around like, how do we incentivize A+ players to be retained in a DAO? How do we retain the best contributors? How do we prevent them from being, poached by another small organization, perhaps centralized organization, right? Or even other DAOs, right? How do you manage the culture of a flat sort of governance structure, with maybe imposed sort of augmented hierarchies on top, right? I think there's a lot to figure out, and this is sort of just like it's still very early in reality. And I've sort of like a lot of people have discussed like a DAO is going to kill venture capital funds. I think like people misunderstand this topic in a way, like in the sense that venture capital is this is a marketplace. It's this it's a marketplace for capital and a marketplace for opportunities. And as long as there are great opportunities that need funding and support, and as long as there's capital that needs to be deployed for high risk, high upside opportunities, venture capital as an industry will always exist. But I think the difference is that who's participating in this venture capital marketplace, right, is the real question. And I think that it's not an either or situation with DAOs and funds. I think like it doesn't matter what type of organization you are. Like the best organizations that provide the best output and support will be known as the most helpful organization. And so on. So with 1KX, we sort of see ourselves as like really being doubling down on our sort of like 3 core competencies, right? Which is sort of token design and DAO building, and I would say engineering, and I would say our engineering capabilities really drive more of the first and second sort of focus, right? And these are 2 sort of capabilities that we have a lot of trust in being the best organization in crypto at, right? If there was a better organization or a DAO that could do it better, great, but I think that everything else we want to definitely help support, right? So we're not going to be a fund that like is specialized in design. We want to support and work with a design service DAO, for example, right? And I think that quality will rise, whether you're a DAO or centralized organization. Quality will rise, and for DAOs, it's about figuring out how to produce quality, right? That's really the name of the game. And I think that I think one big part of like this thesis of like why DAOs is related to this idea that you can form DAOs very quickly. The participants of DAOs are fluid, capital is fluid,
Right.
These are sort of like smart contract based organizations that can shut down overnight, form overnight. We believe that sort of we're going to see a lot more experimentation happen just purely due to the lowered, cost to launch a DAO, right? And due to the lowered cost of launching a DAO, we're going to see a lot more experimentation. We're going to see a lot more things work as a result. And we're going to see, because of that, we're going to see a lot more things we're going to see a lot more competition against centralized organizations and funds, and I think that will, in general, push, every participant, whether a DAO or centralized fund or just a regular venture fund, et cetera, to have a high bar, and that's going to push quality of services and quality of capital far above what it is for founders. And I think that's what it is about. It's, revolutionizing and disrupting venture capital is not about destroying it. This marketplace is immensely important and critical for innovation, right? It's really about actually how do we help founders? How do we empower them, increasingly empower them? over time as there's more and more capital, right? And in times where it isn't capital, how do you better coordinate capital and make it available for founders, right? So I think it's a cycle-based sort of game that that we're trying to figure out here.
By the way, in terms of some of the challenges you called out there, it sounds very familiar to what we've all known in like legacy startup world, except we've replaced a startup with a DAO. And I think the DAO then allows you to more easily coordinate folks, put together a team, but it also means that if the incentives aren't there, I think it's just as easy for that sort of a team to dismantle or just to not see the point of continuing to work together versus in the traditional world. I mean, even if you're running if you've got some LLC in the United States, I mean, you're going through some paperwork there. There is some pain. And I think in a world where we're all working remotely, we're able to connect through, every imaginable tool, whether it's centralized or decentralized at this point. It's made sense to me that like that next generation of business entity is a DAO. By the way, so I know we're probably running out of time, and I also have realized we have survived with both of our internets having gone in and out a bit. So I don't want to press our luck. I wanted to end on this is a slide from your blog post. So as we talk through those different types of DAOs, here's a breakdown of some of the teams that you are more intimately working with, having invested in them. I guess anything else to call out here? I noticed one thing was the recruiting DAOs and audit DAOs. Like in our space, it's so valuable to be able to have someone who can audit your smart contracts, and it's difficult to get on the calendar of different auditing firms. So am I reading that, correctly as an audit DAO referring to folks who would basically like help you to, audit your smart contracts?
Yes.
Very cool. And the recruiting, like, is that basically like a recruitment firm? I mean,
I would say that, communities are the aggregating talent, right? So, Macro is directly training up, developers, right? And providing a recruiting service for that. Third Academy is a DAO that's looking to produce boot camps to train up developers to marketers, and token engineering, they're really more of a generalized community for token design. So the aggregating, community members and people with a certain expertise, and WGMI is a DAO that's really focused on aggregating, community managers and community builders, right? And training them up. And I think, we sort of frame them as talent DAOs or recruiting DAOs. And Macro is an example where it's a DAO that, is currently, doing, running, that does audits, for projects, such as Open Zeppelin and Treasure and a few others, right? And they also train up developers through their bootcamp. And the future goals is to actually expand into building out, an incubation arm as well as an investment arm, right? Where they're able to really, value capture the services and the existing services that they've built already, right? And the sort of investment that we're going to be announcing soon. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I'm not sure if you're alluding to this. Anything that we should cover here in terms of there was an announcement and a post on Twitter about Hydra. Anything there you can share about what is Hydra and what we how this will add to that landscape of DAOs?
Yeah, Hydra is the first crypto DAO fund of funds. It's an investment DAO purely focused on investing in other investment DAOs. And I would also add venture DAOs, right? And I would classify venture DAOs as being service DAOs, incubation DAOs, investment DAOs as a group, right? But like all the DAOs that make up a venture ecosystem. And yeah, I think it's this idea that, we're extremely early with investment DAOs, incubation DAOs, and service DAOs. Let's figure out how to, invest in them, right? Let's figure out how to, be sort of this crypto native like DAO fund of funds, right? And I think let's create a capital market for these venture DAOs, right? That's sort of what Hydra is. It's sort of taking what we've done with MCD and I guess, forming the next abstraction layer of DAOs where, this aims to really invest into other venture DAOs and investment DAOs and support them as well, from legals to ops to coordination frameworks. And and that's sort of something we're building with, MetaCartel Ventures, Pet3r and 1KX. So we're kind of sort of collectively incubating this right now.
Wow.
And
Really
it's
cool.
exciting. It's exciting because, again, extremely early, and I think you learn the most when you are first to something.
Yeah, and so with Hydra, then that is a fund of funds specifically for other investment DAOs, right? Like, because when I saw that, I was thinking right away, there's funds in our space that would benefit and like look to work with someone like a Hydra. But I think it makes the most sense to me as well to start off with. It should be a focus on other DAOs. I think like that, if you believe in like a token maximalist future, a decentralized future, I think it's about, supporting your peers and I'll say at this point, like it's just been overwhelming if you try to keep up with all the DAOs that are launching. I think we're already at a place where if you've got a great idea for a DAO, I would strongly encourage go look and make sure that it doesn't already exist. Not to discourage folks from like creating their own DAO, but there's just so much out there that's already in motion. And, a lot of it's going to die off. A lot of this, we're still very early. A lot of this is experimentation. But I love the idea of Hydra. To me is like one of the most exciting ideas because that will help to seed more investment DAOs. Some of those folks, it might just be kicking off their career or sort of proving themselves in the Web3 space. And I will say, like, again, having lived through the early days of MetaCartel as an outsider, I don't want to shy away from the fact you all look like a bunch of crazy people. I mean, I really thought you were all insane. I had an opportunity, biggest regret of my life, not joining. Probably, to be fair too, I didn't have the ETH at the time to be able to join anyways. I was very new to the space, but still, you look at that lineup, and I ended up eventually benefiting from an investment DAO like MetaCartel, where Zapper, DeFi Zap, I was a friend of the team and an early user, and I remember when Nodar raised from you all, like that was that was motivation. It built confidence that he could raise money. It seemed impossible at the time, and then once he and Seb joined forces and created Zapper, things really took off. But Peter, thanks so much for your time. It's such a privilege always to talk with you, and you and the team at 1KX. I'd encourage everyone, like, you got to subscribe to follow him on Medium and Twitter and wherever else they post research and thoughts. It's very thoughtful. It's kind of amazing. It's all posted there for free. It's not about putting out content to shill a portfolio. I've always felt like you really make every intention of sharing insights that really can collectively help us all continue to grow a decentralized maximalist future. And I want to remind everyone to follow you on Twitter here. This is kind of a joke, but you can learn more at 1kx.io. That's not an example of their design abilities there, but it does give a quick one too about the fund. Peter, anything else you wanted to share though before we go?
No, I don't think. I think we covered a lot today, and it was super fun chatting as always.
Absolutely. So, well, everyone, thanks for joining. If you enjoyed this, you can subscribe at DeFiDad.com. And obviously, if you are building a service DAO, an incubation DAO, an investment DAO, whatever, please keep me and my team in mind, as well as 1KX, my team being at Fourth Revolution Capital. We've actually, full disclosure here, I think we discussed this earlier, both of us invested in Ready Player DAO. and another team would be Decent Labs amongst many different DAOs. So it's not just a talking point. We're putting our money where our mouth is there. So otherwise, everyone have a great day. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks.